maybe just a show of hands first before we start here. How many are feeling a little bit anxious being here today, or maybe really anxious being here today? I know I'm anxious, so there's got to be other people here that are anxious. A few? Okay, so what I'm going to invite us to do first, as Joanna said, this is an embodied practice. So I'm going to invite us to literally turn over and see if we can find the exits to the room. I'm serious, inviting you to look over with your eyes, with your neck, and actually just notice the two exits, the places that you could literally leave this room with. Actually, there's more. Although it says no exit during the show, so that's not an option. But you do have two. And let your whole body actually sense these exits. So see if you can turn and literally let your legs feel what they need to do in order to leave this room, which is a reminder that for our body, that we can leave. And that is an option because this is being recorded and you'll have the information if you need it. The second thing I'm going to invite us to do is take a moment and think of a person, an animal, or a place that helps you feel safe and secure. So it could be somebody that you love that maybe is even actually here or at home or is an ancestor. I know for me, that person is often my mom who died 2.5 years ago, but even just thinking about her, I ground a little bit more to the earth. Or it could be an animal, a pet, or it could be a place. In this area, we know there's so many beautiful places along the water or in the forest that we might visit. And actually, when we're there, they help us feel more safe and secure. So we're just going to take a couple of breaths together as we imagine those beings beside us or us being in those places. And as you're letting your imagination have those presences here, just noticing what that does for us. And you can repeat this over the course of the next hour and a half. If at any point you're noticing you're getting a bit activated, again, you're free to leave if you need to. You're also free to just let yourself feel the sense of support that's actually here and we can conjure. So I think the acknowledgements need to go both ways. I really want to thank Joanna and Jane and Sarah, all from the Sechelt Hospital Foundation. We have worked really hard together, and the commitment and the perseverance and the support that you've offered has been really tremendous. And also want to shout out to Kathy and Vicky and Katie. Together, we, with the Division of Family Practice, we actually successfully put an application for funding through the Shared Care Program to create a collaborative mental health project to support things like today. And that is something that I look forward to the ongoing work around. I also want to acknowledge my own teachers and my mentors, and that includes some of the ancestors that have really supported me and have guided me on my own path. So let's look at the objectives for today. The first one is to recognize the types and signs of trauma. And notice it says in context. And that's because we all live in different realities with different histories. This is wild because as I look into the audience, I see faces that I haven't seen sometimes for years, so I'm slightly distracted. But just to say, we all have different realities, different conditions, different histories. And that has a big influence on us. And then it really actually makes us start to think about understanding the physiology of trauma and well-being, because even though we have all these differences, we all live in bodies. And there are universal ways that our bodies attempt to defend ourselves. And that gives us a shared humanity and a shared language that we can start to work with. And then ultimately, this is about creating safe spaces for collective healing, understanding that we are wired to connect. We are at our best when we are connecting. I do want to start with a quote from Lilla Watson. She's an Indigenous Australian activist. She delivered these words at a 1985 UN conference. "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And to me, that really emphasizes that we all have healing work to do. No matter what our background, this is work we need to do for ourselves and within community. So here's an image of a basket. And I share this because, as we know, trauma is a complex and sometimes challenging topic. And so we need a basket in some ways that's going to help be a container for this conversation. And so it's going to be some ideas that are actually what we use to weave this basket with. So some ideas I want to just bring to the forefront now. One idea, that trauma is not a personal failure. In fact, it's more of a system issue. And that hopefully lets us get away from the shaming and of ourselves, judging of ourselves and others, and actually kind of take the responsibility just from individuals, but actually put the responsibility back on a system. A second idea, that is to shift our view of emotions. I know it's really easy in our society to see emotions as bad, things we need to fear or suppress or deny. And I'm going to invite us to remember that emotions actually serve a purpose, and that in fact they have a genius that we really want to appreciate. The third idea is to go slow to go fast. Often trauma actually happens because things are too overwhelming and they're happening too quickly, and we can't actually process what's happening. So when we go slow, we actually not only start to really sense what's happening in our systems, but we also start to sense the subtle supports that are around us that can help us be with the difficulties. The fourth idea is, as Joanna mentioned, is that we really want to pay attention to the story of our bodies. Yes, our stories are important in terms of the narrative through our mouths, and there's a story our body wants to tell. And that's not easy because a lot of times our bodies have been traumatized. It's the place where many of us have experienced some real overwhelming experiences. So this is where the fifth idea becomes really important, which is carrying connection with ourselves, with each other, with the land is a critical way for us to actually find the courage and the support in order to actually sense what's happening within our systems. So we're going to kind of unpack some of these ideas as we go along today. And just a couple of agreements I'm inviting us to consider in our time. I want us to take good care of yourselves, whether that means you need to leave, stretch your body. If you need to move, if you're noticing some stuff is coming up and your joints are getting a little sore, letting your body move. That's an important thing. An unconditional positive regard, where we start with the assumption that all of our intentions are good, and we hold each other with that kind of warm heart. A generous listening, that's inviting us to really hear what's being said, but not just with our ears, letting ourselves receive that emotionally, and even with our eyes and our whole sensate body. It's possible later that we are going to do a little exercise where, in very brief ways, you have a chance to share a little bit about your experience with another. Please keep anything you might glean about another person confidential. Joanna's outlined the process for questions, and I just want to reemphasize that there's a tension here because everybody's voice here matters. Your opinions matter, your experiences matter, and it's possible, unintentionally, our words can activate another person's nervous system, can actually be more challenging for others. So that's part of the reason why we're doing it this way. Our hope is that by the end of our time together today, we'll actually have some time to metabolize what might be coming up in ways that are hopefully helpful, including some of the practices we'll be going through today, and some other things I'll mention later. On the bottom there, it says activation warning. So this is just to acknowledge it's possible. It maybe has already happened to some of you. What's going to get covered here may create some activity in our system that we need to really embrace and then therefore take good care of ourselves. And as I mentioned, we've already covered one practice that you might do to support ourselves, bring in a support of some sort into our mind. But this is really an invitation to take care. So I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting Marilyn Peterson to come up to the stage to join me. And just to let you know, Marilyn is somebody I've known for 15 years. I first met Marilyn, I guess I would say as a patient. And yeah, take it in. And Marilyn joined through some of the trauma-sensitive mindfulness groups that we were running. And I've also got a chance to work with Marilyn on some research. So we've been colleagues, and it's my distinct pleasure to call Marilyn my friend. And Marilyn's here because she's going to be actually sharing some of her experiences alongside me as we talk about some ideas. Marilyn will just give us a little brief, a sense of what she's noticed for herself, and that can sometimes be really helpful. So we're going to hear different parts of Marilyn's experience as we go along. For now, Marilyn, I'd be curious. We'll make sure you have a mic. Okay. I'm wondering if, Marilyn, you might share with us just what you chose for a person, a place, or an animal that in whose presence you actually feel safe and secure.
Hi, how's it working?
Yes.
Okay, for me, I've got my little dog, rescue dog, Billy. And Billy is definitely my little security blanket. And the reason is because Billy's come a long way. He was a rescue from California who had gone through a lot of trauma himself. So him and I are on a healing journey together. So he supports me and I support him. So he's here now. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marilyn. And Marilyn taught me something just about 10 minutes ago, which was, we named Marilyn on the beginning slide, a person with lived experience. And she said, I don't like that. I was like, why is that? And she said, because I'm a person with living experience. And it's an ongoing process. So just want to acknowledge that. Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah. And I'm grateful that you have Billy with you here too. I have a feeling that Billy would protect you from me, and I have to be a little careful around Billy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some definitions of trauma. And this is one from Tara Brock. You might know her as a mindfulness instructor who actually does a lot of trauma-sensitive practice. Trauma is when we have encountered an out-of-control, frightening experience that disconnected us from all sense of resourcefulness and safety. And why I wanted to share this particular definition is because I think it gets to the heart of what we find with trauma. It's really two things: disconnection, disempowerment. And that combination of two things is really what's at the heart of this. Here's another definition from Peter Levine, who I'll mention a bit more later. Trauma originates as a response in the nervous system and does not originate in the event. And this is really important because that means in order to heal, we have to find the ways to get into our bodies. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that's not always easy. So let's turn to, some of the types of trauma. So there's PTSD shock type trauma. And this typically refers to an experience we have in our body that appears to be related to an event, say a high-speed car accident, or maybe a very sudden lethal cancer that happens to a family member. But when we start to understand complex PTSD, that sheds a new light on even in specific events. So what is complex PTSD? This is when we have traumatic things happening when we're very young. And I'm going to name a bunch of them in a moment. And if it's repeated, and if there's many of them, that actually interferes with the development of our own survival strategies. It actually interferes with our capacity to connect and feel empowered. So you can imagine if, for instance, somebody had a primary caregiver who neglected them to a certain degree or even a high degree when they were young. Later in life, if that person actually experiences neglect from a partner, that's going to have a much, much different impact on that person than somebody else, for instance, who had very attuned caregivers. And so we start to see how we can't really see it in an event, but it's actually what the nervous system is interpreting situations as. Intergenerational trauma, it really refers to the idea that we know that there's epigenetic changes that happen, and that trauma then is traumatized reactions and behaviors can pass from one generation to another. So to give you an example from my life, my parents both were born in India during the time of colonial India, and they lived through at a very young age the partition in India that saw a country get divided by religion. And suddenly there was a lot of violence in India. And my parents lived through all of that. And I can tell you through my own nervous system, I've inherited some of those things, even though I never lived there. That's intergenerational trauma. And there's many, many other examples that we could think of. Collective trauma refers to anything where it's more of a systemic oppression or genocidal behavior towards entire communities. And I think we know in our country here, the very obvious one of how Indigenous communities across the land have been treated. And this is a very challenging type of trauma because when that's present, all of these other types of trauma are actually more likely to occur. And that's going to make sense when we kind of unpack this further. So I mentioned, some of the things that can happen in childhood. And again, I'm sorry if this might be activating for some folks, but it's important we name it. Adverse childhood experiences. This is based on a study that was done almost 30 years ago. And in that study, they looked at 10 specific adverse childhood experiences that you can see on the slide here. And you could see these as broad categories, things like childhood abuses, neglect, either emotional or physical, household dysfunction type things like witnessing violence, parents divorcing, mental illness in the family, incarcerations, those kinds of things. And what they were able to discover, and notice this doesn't even cover racism, discrimination, but even still, with these 10 topics, what they were able to show was that depending on the number of adverse childhood experiences you might have had, it actually could predict physical health conditions later on in life, psychological health conditions later on in life. In fact, so much so that if somebody were to have an adverse childhood experience score of 6 compared to none at all, the likelihood of using IV drugs would be 4,600% more likely, a 5,000% increase in attempt of suicide, and at risk of a lifespan reduced by 20 years. These are really sobering numbers to consider. And again, that's hopefully to help us to realize we can't think of trauma as a sign and its impacts as personal failures. These are system issues. And just to share with you, we know from a lot of evidence that an ACE score has a strong and graded relationship, meaning the higher the ACE score, the more likely these are going to happen. These are all different conditions that have been shown to be related. And I can see myself on that list, and I imagine many of us can see ourselves on that list, potentially in various places. There's another part to this that I want to mention, because in some ways you could think of these as the branches. And then there's the roots. This is another ACE, adverse community environments. And when we really look at this part of the graph, we start to see what are the roots. And these are social conditions of things like poverty, racism, discrimination, community disruptions, lack of opportunity and capital, poor housing, violence. These are all things that are actually, as I mentioned earlier, make things more likely for adverse childhood experiences to happen. So, to me, if you can't read this, what it helps me understand is trauma is not just one more thing on our plate, it is the plate. And we need to be really having more conversations about it. So, I'm going to introduce one more practice here, because I don't know what's happening for you, but I feel a bit activated just sharing some of that information. So I'm going to invite us all to just exhale as deeply as you can. And then see if you can let a breath come in through your nose as long as you can make it. And then let the exhale happen as long as you can let it happen. And if you need to, maybe let that person or animal come into your mind, or let your mind go to a place where I feel a sense of safety and security. So I'm going to invite Marilyn, if you're willing, just to say, and I'm going to invite you again, as we talked, to not go into details as a way that we don't activate people's systems, but just to share maybe some of the lived experiences that you've gone through.
Thanks. Thank you very much for being here. This is a great opportunity for all of us to share a common goal that we have, and that's getting healthy and getting well. For me, that first list that we had, there was 5 or 6 that stood out. Incest, family, sexual abuse at a very young age was the start, and things such as family violence, neglect, abandonment. It's funny, as I was thinking this morning of some things, more things were coming up that I kind of thought that I hadn't buried, but I realized, yeah, there were still some things that are buried. So when we were talking about the lived compared to the living, it's a lifelong journey of going through these things and uncovering these things. But the reactions are so much different than when I first started on the journey. And thanks to Rahul and thanks to programs and understanding of what I was going through. For my first part of life, it was about pushing everything down. Nothing mattered. It all was put on the big girl pants and just walk through life, because none of that had anything to do with who I was or what I was. Until in the middle of recovery, because of course it led me to addiction and alcoholism, I ended up in treatment. And it was there when I first saw that, like with the ACEs, that people with addictions follow a pattern. And usually the pattern was the initial things, the trauma. I call it my wounds, because it's not the trauma that's past, but the wounds were still there and they were buried. So for me to open up and let some of those wounds have light and to be able to speak about them, which gave them light and gave them truth, was the way for me to start healing, to know that I wasn't alone, that I was in rooms with other people who needed healing as much as I did, to know that that there was a plan, that there was a recipe, that there was a way for me to heal myself out of it with the help of others.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. So we're gonna keep hearing more a little bit as we go along here, and you touched on some really important pieces around shame, and how secrecy and even our own to keep ourselves protected from some of that information, we actually keep things buried, and then we don't always have the supports that really allow us to be having these conversations. So let's hold on to that, because we're going to look in this in a bit more detail. But it does actually help us maybe come to this question. And this is going to be a segue into talking about some of the survival responses. How may trauma present? Well, it might show up if some of us get combative. And as you look at this list, by the way, just notice if you can recognize any of these in yourselves or the people that you live with. We might get combative. Trauma shows up as being really rigid and being inflexible with our thought process, black and white type thinking, feeling really agitated and feeling restless in our system, avoiding things, whether it's avoiding truths, avoiding people, avoiding situations, shutting down memories of things, shutting down physically, collapsing sometimes, getting disengaged from our lives, disengaged from the people that matter to us, disengaged maybe from our work, missing appointments, things that we normally like to do or are important for our own health. We might end up missing things. And then sometimes, and you alluded to that as well, sometimes behaviors that we might deem as sabotaging. And hopefully by the end of today, we might think of those differently. I share this with you because before I understood what I'm sharing with you today, when these things were either within myself or if I'd see them from people that I was trying to serve, it was easy to judge them. It was easy to judge myself if I felt them. And I've known some of these myself very deeply. And so this has helped me kind of go from, rather than saying what's wrong with me or what's wrong with you, it's more a question of what happened to me, what happened to you. And it can open up our compassion and our curiosity. So this is leading into part 2, which is survival responses in the body and the importance of a felt sense of safety. And I'm just going to do a time check on myself here. Not bad. So, I want to say a little bit about somatic experiencing. This is based on many people's work. Peter Levine was somebody who started this training 40 years ago. And there are many, many other people that have really contributed to it moving forward. And you can tell by the word somatic, it's about getting into the body. What is it? Here's a definition, and I'm sorry it's a little clinical, but it can be helpful. It offers a framework to assess where a person is stuck in fight, flight, or freeze responses and provides clinical tools to resolve these fixated physiological states. So, to break that down, that's really just saying trauma lives in our body, and when we don't have enough support, when we don't feel safe enough, we actually can't process it, and it gets stuck in our system. And so essentially what we need are ways to release that traumatic process gently so it doesn't overwhelm us. We need to have a body-oriented approach so we can actually work with where trauma gets stored, and it needs to happen in relationship. This is not work meant to be done alone. So before we get into the survival responses, I want to just share a quote from Dr. Joy DeGroy. In this slide, I want to accredit to Harley Eagle. He's one of the people I work very closely with, and he shared this with me. When living in situations of sustained trauma, our survival responses are called appropriate adaptation to living in a hostile environment. So as you hear that, that means what we're about to talk to are actually genius things that our nervous system knows how to do to help us adapt to difficult situations. So let's get into this. I want to share one term today, which is neuroception. And this is a term that was coined by Stephen Porges. And what it means is that all of us, you can check it out for yourself right now, all of us 24 hours a day are unconsciously scanning to see whether the situation is safe or if there's some kind of threat or danger or even a life threat. And then depending on what our nervous system senses, it's going to fall into different strategies to manage that. And this is all unconscious. So if it's a relatively minor threat or our nervous system feels like it can handle it simply through relationship, we kick into socially engaging, and we might actually try to settle the threat down through conversation, through our connections. If our system does not feel like that's possible, we will go into a fight or flight response, and that's where we're going to either engage with it and confront it or get the heck out of there. If neither of those feel like, if our system deems that neither of those are actually options, we actually do a very incredible, genius things, and many other creatures do this too. We know how to shut down. And that's basically helping us not feel what in the moment feels too overwhelming, because there's nothing we can do about it. And finally, what's on there, I just added this in the last day or two because there's not a ton of research on this, although it's a very real concept. We can also fall into a fawn response. And this is a complicated, pretty sophisticated thing we can do, which is using all of these different, and these are on the ladder, by the way, all of these different survival responses. We can pretend to agree. In other words, we're appearing like we're totally fine with what's happening, but deep down, we're actually having to freeze or numb our authentic self so that we feel safe enough in an environment where that's our best choice. And the reality is the fight or fight energy is actually still there. It's just not going to be as easy to detect because we're pretending and fawning agreement. Why are these important? Because depending on which one of these physiologies and responses we're in, it's going to tell you what range of behaviors we have access to. So let's see if we can break that down a little bit more. So the social engagement system. I'm going to make sure I don't lose track here of where I wanted to speak to.
You keep going that.
What's that?
I'll keep going.
Thank you. So when the social engagement system is engaged, we are at our best. We can engage with any threat, as I mentioned. We can use our facial muscles. We can actually use our tone of voice to settle a situation down, to manage conflict calmly. This is where there's a healthy balance because our body works at its best. Our gut function is working at its best. Our cells regenerate well. Our tissues are actually healing best when we're here because we're getting perfusion throughout the body in a good way. In fact, even the blood flow to our brain is such that we're at our most creative and resourceful. And perhaps most importantly, when this is engaged, when we feel safe, we care about others. We care about the land. This is our natural state. If we are slipping into the mobilization survival response, this is the fight or flight that most of us are pretty familiar with. This is very, very different. And that's if we don't have enough safety or support, this is where we fall into. And here, things are very, very different because we're already starting to get cued to the threat. And some of you might recognize that when we're here, we become hyper vigilant, right? Because we're really focused on the threats and trying to keep ourselves safe. And therefore, it's actually hard to notice anything that would suggest otherwise. Our muscles tighten, our heart beats more vigorously, our breath gets faster. And all of those things are kind of getting us into a position that could actually help us escape or flee. But there's changes of blood flow. So that means we actually get less blood flow to the parts of our brain that allow for creativity. Why? Because right now we don't need creativity. We need to act on impulse to manage the moment based on what we already know. This is not a time to be creative. So one way you could think about this is if you've ever seen some of those movies, say of a deer being chased by a cheetah, that deer is doing what it knows is going to help keep it safe. It's not trying new things in the situation. Now, if our system does not deem that that's going to work, fighting or fleeing, they're not going to be successful.
It's on his front.
Exactly. We drop down even further. And where do we drop? We drop into the immobilization survival response. And we all have this in us. And this is incredibly genius, actually. Again, if you think about that analogy of a deer being chased by a cheetah, if you've seen those videos at the very last minute, before the cheetah catches the deer, what does the deer do? It drops down. It literally kind of plays dead. And what its system is doing is pretty incredible because the heart rate and blood pressure plummet. It actually gets flooded with endorphins. You might know endorphins are some of the chemicals in our system that help us feel less pain. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Because if that deer were to get bitten or attacked, guess what? It wouldn't feel that as much because of the endorphins. And it wouldn't even bleed as much because the heart rate and the blood pressure has kind of taken blood away from the periphery. In fact, if the cheetah were to run away, which could happen because now the deer appears dead, guess what the deer would do? The deer would actually, at some point, once it feels safe enough, it would actually get up, shake its body off, get rid of all of that stored tension, and who knows, it might even get back to grazing in a few moments because it's been able to metabolize what's there. The challenge is we're not supposed to be in this state for very long periods of time because this is very expensive, right? We've got our tissues are not healing well here. We don't have access to the most creative parts of ourselves. It's a very costly way to live. And that's why you'll see down here, if we don't have enough safety or support, we will stay down here. We won't come out of it. And the costs are high because then we might actually fall into that literally more of a depressed state. We might actually notice our system is actually collapsing. Our thinking might be more cloudy. We might have deficits in some of our memory. We might have a hard time remembering details of our life. And we might isolate ourselves. That's what its nature is to do, is to keep ourselves protected and hide. And that's why the word shame is here. It's kind of fitting that the word shame is kind of almost hidden behind the flowers here because none of us want to talk about shame. But shame actually shows up here because we shame ourselves for not being at our best when we're here if we don't understand this. Why am I not thinking more clearly? Why don't I have the energy to manage my life? So, the nature of these responses, it's a little bit like a sled full of rocks. That as we fall down into immobilization, all of these things bring urgency. And it extinguishes our curiosity because if we're experiencing something that's life-threatening, we can't afford to be curious. And guess what? We're now tuned to threat. We're tuned to actually protect ourselves. We're driven to self-protect, which means we can't afford to care too much about other people. And as we've been talking about, this is strongly shaped by early trauma because the fight, flight, and freeze responses, they're actually fully functional when we're born. The social engagement part of our survival response takes the better part of 20 years to develop, and maybe longer. And what helps it develop? It gets developed through attunement and caregivers that are actually able to help us and respond to our moments so that we actually can play with that kind of experience and develop that part of ourselves. So if we don't have that, we're actually kind of left a little bit with the fight, flight, freeze responses and the fawn response as ways to manage. And those all have significant costs, as we've been talking about. And hopefully it helps you understand why long-term, if we're using those responses primarily, our system might fall into challenges. We might get chronic pain from a body that's constantly tense. If our blood sugars have to go up and we have a predisposition to diabetes, our blood sugars are often going up to give us energy to manage this. We might notice issues with our heart or blood pressure. If we're stuck in a lot of hypervigilance, we might notice insomnia, difficulty sleeping. And we might need to use substances to keep a lot of this distressing symptoms at bay. So maybe let's take one more breath together. So let's see if we can all just exhale. And then inhaling deeply. And then exhaling deep and long if you can. And feeling free to keep that up if you notice that at least that reminds us to keep breathing. So we're going to come back to Marilyn now. And Marilyn, I'm inviting you to maybe, as you hear those different survival physiologies, if you might just name if there's a few that you found yourself in.
Right? Yeah, most definitely. The fight or flight, the freezing, definitely that was one that would get, I just out of my body, not feel anything, just go to another place.
So,
the fawning, that's definitely become anybody you wanted me to become. I would, to gain favor, so nobody would be angry with me, so nobody would see me for who I really was. I would be anybody that you needed me to be. And the escape, I was great at that. I left a whole town and a whole family and everything and just ran away to some place that I felt was safer. And it worked out. It was. Getting away sometimes does help, not always though. You can't run away from everything. So for me, those were my biggest technique, and addiction, of course, using anything to stop the pain. And for me, that's why I call it the wound, is because it was not like a pinched nerve or a broken arm. It was a pain inside that I couldn't describe, a loneliness, an emptiness, a bucket that kept needing to fill me up. And so the need to try and escape that was very strong until I went into recovery and started to realize that there was a pattern here and that I wasn't alone, that I was falling into the pattern of trauma, people who had been affected by trauma. And understanding that just as understanding this about how it affects me physically, that holding everything in. No wonder I got chronic back pain or stiffness or joint sore migraines, was another thing that followed me for years, until the help of this and realizing that was something by learning how to relax would take me out of that area. So those were pretty well the ones that I would use the most for lifetime.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for continuing to share part of your experience, your living experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so why are we having this conversation? What are the implications of this? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I do know that there's some healthcare providers here. So I do want to acknowledge that this is important, first of all, to think even from that perspective. So if you're a healthcare worker, well, chances are you're having to meet people in our community that have experienced trauma. And guess what? That can be contagious. We can actually feel that in our system. And that's what vicarious trauma means. So healthcare workers have that challenge to deal with. And guess what? If you're a healthcare worker, you are also human. And more than likely, you've had challenges in your life, and sometimes traumatic challenges So it can awaken our own trauma that we then have to work with. Hands up if you agree our healthcare system is under some significant strain right now. Right, we all can agree there's a lot of challenge right now, and that means that more people are asked to do more work, more people are getting burnt out, and then having more people take on that work, and the demands are getting higher. And so that's adding to, guess what? It's still using the same nervous system to manage those kinds of threats to our system. And then you add on top of all that, that I think our healthcare system is a little bit slow, understandably, to understand that if we're going to really heal these things, we have to focus on the body. And we tend generally to focus more on cognitive answers. And those are very beneficial. And yet they are also limited. And I'm really excited that I've seen signs how we're actually starting to integrate more body work. Implications for us in the community. The very first thing I've written there is colonized culture. And I think we can understand what our Indigenous relatives are going through as a starting place. But I think it's also important to remember that the culture we currently are in was built by colonizers who themselves were likely fleeing persecution, oppression, inequities, and probably did not have the skills or the know-how how to metabolize their own trauma. And guess what? That trauma then gets blown outwards. And what happens then? We start to see some of the social inequities because that whole idea of power over others gets passed on. And it starts to happen over and over again. So now we have power over, when you think of societies where there's patriarchy, power over women, power over children, power over potentially certain groups of people, power over maybe disabled people. There's all these places where people may be finding that these inequities are really playing a role. And then there's climate change because we have a relationship with land that's also been disconnected. And so we have a power over the land, which is playing a role in climate change. Maybe just a show of hands if any of these are true for you in terms of your responses to climate change. Anxiety about where we're going, anger that we're not doing enough, and helpless to do anything about it. That's these responses in action. And then, of course, we've just come through a pandemic that I would say we have yet to be anywhere close in terms of healing from. And I think all of us can say there's a certain amount of activation in our system from actually a kind of collective trauma that many of us actually have had challenges around. So we need to be thinking about these things as we move forward. So this is a slide just to introduce one other exercise, which is a couple of belly breaths. So I'm going to invite us, if you want, you could put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And we'll just see if we can take some breaths that allow the belly hand to be the one that moves. And that's not going to be easy at first, but I'll try to demonstrate it myself. So as we inhale, we're kind of filling in the belly, more so than the chest hand. And as we exhale, we're really exhaling from the belly. We'll just practice for maybe a minute or so, breathing into our belly, breathing out from our belly. And this is a way that we can kind of tell our body that right now, in this moment, there's relative safety for us. You can even lengthen your exhalation if you want, because that can be another way that we can really get the body sensing that. Okay, so what's today all about? Today's really about supporting a felt sense of safety. Why? Because that helps us come back up the ladder. It helps us access the energy and the capacity when we're in a socially engaged state that we're going to need if we ever want to process any of the trauma that's in our system. So how do we do that? First off is having some humility around culture, taking the time to learn each other's cultures, and also not assuming that other people do things the way we do, especially if it's a non-dominant culture. Another thing we can do is grounding in nature. As we've talked about, we're all connected to the land, and the more we can actually sense that connection directly, along with any other ancestral practices, like the one Sito offered us with the drumming. You might have noticed an impact just hearing the drumming and the song and how that influenced your body. You might have noticed if that gave you a sense of grounding. Those are really helpful practices for us to be considering. I know for myself, understanding these survival responses helped me feel more safe because, again, I stopped shaming myself around the times I would shut down in conversations where I wouldn't be fully there, or if I was getting combative in relationships, or if I was running away from conflict. Fawn, you've mentioned it. That's something I'm still healing from, is that desire to please others that's actually from a defensive place underneath. So understanding can be very helpful. And then you'll see one about regulation practices. So this is anything that actually helps our body feel a little bit more comfortable. So that could be breath work like we've been exploring today. For some of us, that might be through moving our bodies, through yoga or activities. We did a visualization exercise today about actually just letting some supports come into our mind. Music, art, time in nature, all of those are actually engaging some of our neural networks that actually help us access our social engagement system. And the very bottom one, which maybe you can't read because of these beautiful flowers that I don't want us to move, but what I'm going to read it for you, it says reliable reciprocal relationships. And this is referring just to that idea, perhaps more than anything else, if we can find relationships where we can be with other people who we trust to hear us and be with us in good ways. Yeah, I see some people already hugging and spending, maybe you've had that person with you here too. And really when you think about it, what this is doing is it's providing the attuned caregiving that maybe some of us didn't fully get when we were young. And the cool thing is we know our systems are plastic, which means growth continues. As long as we're breathing, growth will continue and we can continue to heal our systems. So what we're going to do next is a demonstration. And Marilyn was very kind to lend her nervous system for us, because what we're really going to do is just maybe share with you a few different things that you could actually perhaps see and then play for yourself around how to support another person to feel safe. So as you're watching this, it's going to be maybe a 5-minute demonstration, not very long. Just see if you notice it's possible some survival responses show up either in me or in Marilyn or in yourself. You can kind of track any of that. And then also just noticing silently if you notice anything contributed to a felt sense of safety. And then Marilyn and I are just going to unpack this together afterwards. Ready? Done. Okay. So, thank you again, Marilyn. And I want to remind you, you have a choice. So the exit's still there if you want it. There's one there too, yeah. Okay, you good to go? Okay. So I'm curious, with all the things we've covered today, if we were just going to start by just letting yourself take in something right now that helps you feel safe and secure, what might that be? Even a little bit more safe and secure.
Kind of knowing that there's people here with the same sense of purpose. Yeah, that everybody wants that, and so it's kind of a sending it forward.
And you kind of did this.
Yeah,
you said that.
Getting the good vibes from people out there, and feeling that we all want to be well, and so that gives me there's no negative heart feeling.
So let's see if you could just let that really be here, that we all want to be well, and just feel that energy, as you said, coming towards you. We all want to be well. Slow down. Yeah.
Sir?
You can really feel that.
Yeah.
Anywhere in your body you feel that?
Because it's almost like a push, yes, it is. So thank you for getting on that.
Yeah. Then if Is it all right to ask you another question? I'm curious with all the stuff we've talked about, if you noticed your system got activated at some point today.
Yeah, there was some startup just when starting to speak about my wounds, my traumas, and little bits of that shame kind of tried to sneak in, and my body trying to push it out. So there was a little bit of a tug of war, and that I could feel mostly in my back.
You could feel that, and can you feel that right now, even just talking about it?
It's kind of the breathing exercises and that relaxation kind of helped that dissipate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So shame came in the room a little bit, and you could feel it in your back.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there was a bit of tightness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you feeling anything right now along those lines, or?
Just a little bit in the shoulders. Is that's my chronic place. So that's where the tightness comes with me. That's where I carry it, and so it's like it immediately wants to run there.
Okay. So would it be all right if we just notice your body and notice where you feel the least tight?
I'm in my tummy after the deep breathing. It's just, just kind of like it was like loosened everything up in the front. So the back's tight, but the front's good.
Okay, so would that be okay just to put our attention here for a moment? And I noticed you put your hand there. How does that feel to have your hand?
Warm.
That feels warm.
Cuddly and safe.
Okay, great. So if you would just take a moment and let yourself feel the warmth. Let yourself feel the belly. And just taking the time you need to really sense that. That's it.
Oh. Yeah. Big back eased up. Yeah.
What's that?
I said the back is eased up. I just kind of jello-y.
Your back is eased up and you're feeling more jello-y. Yeah. Okay, so if we were just going to end in the next few moments and you were going to end in a way that felt kind of right for you and just helped you feel a sense of, a good way to end.
And put shoulder down, sending the good stuff back out to you guys. Thank you.
And you all feel that? Marilyn sending you out some of her good energy too.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have a round of applause for Marilyn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you.
So I wonder if just you could take even a minute or so. I know you can tell me if you're not quite ready for it, but just to share if there was anything around how you and I were, or how I was being with you, that helped you kind of be in this experience.
With you, always your voice, your tone of voice, your deliberation in speaking. It feels like it comes from the heart. So when you talk to me and stuff, I feel like a definite one-to-one connection because of the kindness in your voice and the softness in your voice. So it invites me to open up, to be able to be more honest and open. The fact that you asked my permission if I was ready to answer the questions too. You didn't just bombard me with things, so taking the time to make sure I was ready to continue. That was very, very helpful. And just acknowledging and not making suggestions of what I could feel or should feel or ways to do things. You just let it be me. And that helps. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Marilyn and I did not practice this before, so that's pretty cool because, I'm going to just share with you some of the things that I hope that I think in my experience has been, these are really helpful attitudes that we can afford each other that can actually help another person feel safe. So yes, can we bring some kindness? And as Marilyn said, can we bring that in our voice and in our body language? And that does mean actually doing any regulation practice beforehand so that we are in a place that is more available for another person. Attentive. So, attending, as you said earlier, like attending not just by what Marilyn's saying, but also attending to the heart and the emotion of what's behind there. And then you mentioned kind of slowing things down and being patient so that, we weren't in a real rush to do anything and you had choice to, it was on your time. And then you said, I'm going to use the word curious, but I didn't come in with any ideas, preconceived notions about what Marilyn needed, which is kind of an unknowing, right? Not knowing another person's reality, which kind of leads to the last one, which is trusting that Marilyn is the expert in her own life. You really are. And we're trusting together that whatever comes up, if we create a container, whatever comes up, we can work with. So that's kind of an invitation for you. I'm inviting you to remember this because we're going to come back to this afterwards. So see if you can just think about how that might be relevant for you as you are with yourselves and with each other. Thank you, Marilyn. Good. Okay, so might go into slight warp speed. I'm just kidding, very slight. Part 3, we're accessing a felt sense of safety and belonging. So this slide here is just to, again, reiterate that while a lot of our traumas happen in relationship, in order for us to really heal, we have to reconnect and explore the possibilities. And the truth is, as I said earlier, we are wired to connect. It's actually a biological imperative. It is through connection that all parts of us grow, as I've mentioned earlier. It's through connection that actually we have access to the best ways that our bodies heal. Our organs and tissues function at their best. It's when we're connected and we'll actually seek opportunities to give support and receive support. And when we're connected, we're wired to care. Care for ourselves, care for each other, care for the land. And the good news is the connection can happen with the land. It can happen with even one person. It can happen with an animal. And what we know is if we can experience that sense of safety, even in the moment, that's not compatible with also feeling terror in the same moment. So this brings us to what can we do? Number one, we can start to orient to cues of safety. And this is really hard if we've had trauma. Anybody notice that? It's really hard to do when you have trauma. Why? Because of the negativity bias. We've been evolved to have our eyes on danger. And that's actually kept us alive. If you listen to any of the work of Rick Hansen, he says negative experiences are like Velcro. They stick to us. Positive experiences are like Teflon. They slide right off of us. And the literature would corroborate this, that if we've had a negative experience, it imprints on our system within a second. If we've had a positive experience, we actually have to linger in it for about 20 seconds before our system registers that positive experience. So we actually really have to do a lot of work to orient to cues of safety and therefore linger in these positive states when they arrive. And then when we do that, we can sense as our body starts to settle, we can start to notice, oh, my shoulders have started to come down. Oh, my jaw is starting to unclench. Oh, my fists are starting to uncurl. And once that starts to happen, that's actually a good sign for us. We maybe are in a better position to offer care for another. So some examples of offering safety cues. And I'm actually going to say one that Marilyn brought to my attention that's not on here, which is the number one thing is offering choice and asking for permission. And so we can use these cues, first of all, for ourselves, and then for other people, giving ourselves choice, giving ourselves permission to do any certain amount of work and not forcing ourselves to do anything. Offering ourselves a calm, kind tone? How many would say they are their harshest critic and have some pretty harsh things we say to ourselves? So we can start by seeing if we can start to change the tone of that and also our body language. As we've been practicing today, can we take in anything that actually is pleasant in this moment? Maybe it's an image. Maybe it's a certain sound. I come back to Cito's drum. The sound of the drum is still with me, and I can hear it in my ear. Maybe it's certain smells. Maybe it's a particular way of touch. Again, touch with ourselves. And you brought that in, Marilyn, too, here. The way to touch a belly and feel the warmth. And there might be certain activities that we might engage in that also help offer our system a sense of safety. For many of us, that's through dance or song. Sometimes for some people, it's even humming. We can also just start to attend to any small wins that we've made in our life, any small gains that we've made, whatever our strengths are. What are the supports in our life? And we played with that a little bit today. And as Marilyn and I demonstrated just a few moments ago, we can see if we can find even a few comfortable places in our body. And sometimes that's really hard if we've had a lot of trauma. So then can we track even the least uncomfortable place in our body? Can we notice that? And sometimes like, oh, my whole body's on fire, but maybe my big toe is like a 2 out of 10 on fire. Okay, can I rest my attention there for a few moments and just see what happens? And then finally, we've been talking about all the different cultural rituals. Many of us come from different cultures. There may be rituals in those cultures that actually their very purpose has been to support us to feel safe. So it's time for a little practice, and I'm just going to check and see how we're doing. We are 2 minutes ahead. Wow, this never happens. So we're going to do a little exercise together, and I'm just going to preface this by saying this is a chance for us to play with regulating our own nervous system. So it's about slowing down and getting curious. See, we can suspend our judgments, suspend our shaming of ourselves, and see if we can really take in the good in any moment, as we've been talking about, lingering a little bit in these positive, pleasant experiences. And the value of that when we do that is it actually makes space for discomfort. It makes space for us to be able to tolerate experiences that are maybe painful. And of course, above all, keep it kind, so that the whole experience, we're holding everything with a certain kindness, as Marilyn mentioned, is a critical part of this. So here's the exercise. It's a practice of coming to our senses, very literally, through a stop exercise. And some of you may already know this. We'll do it in a kind of interesting way today. I'm going to talk you through it first, and then we're actually going to practice it together for a few minutes. So the S stands for stop. And that just is inviting us to pause whatever we're thinking about, trying to analyze the information, but just give ourselves permission to be here. The T is to take a few more deeper intentional breaths like we've already practiced. But if there's some other way that you can relax your system, go for it. It might be a certain stretch. It might be a certain movement. Any of that would be welcome. The O is to start observing, and especially observing the good. So I'll walk you through this, but we might start to notice things, first of all, in our environment that maybe help settle our system. We can notice maybe in our body, where does it feel most at home? And we can start to explore feelings and thoughts, and I'll guide you through that process in a moment. And then at the end, we'll come and proceed into the next moment once we've done the exercise. And hopefully we've got a little bit more information about what's happening in our system, and we've had a chance to metabolize a little something. Folks ready? Give it a go? Okay. So I'm going to invite you to first S, stop. And that's, again, just, you can do this eyes open or eyes closed, however you find it best and easiest to really sense what's happening for you. And then the T is to take a few deeper breaths. As maybe we practiced before, maybe a few deeper breaths down into the belly. Feeling the breath as it goes into our back a little bit. Sensing how this breath is a reminder that each of us are worthy of this mysterious gift of breathing that comes to us. So feeling that support, actually, that just comes through the felt sense of our breathing and our connection to the plant world. And then maybe just letting your system start to take in the environment right now, but especially noticing anything that helps you really be here right now. So it might be sensing another person that's in the room or beside you. Or it could be a color that you like. Or maybe you're connecting with the relative silence that you can hear underneath all of the other sounds. And we can start to pay attention to our body. And just maybe see if you can notice where in your body right now you feel the most at ease. And if that's not possible, where is it the least uncomfortable? For me right now, it's in my feet. I can feel my feet are at ease. And even as we're tracking where we feel at ease, yes, we can make space for if there is some tensing somewhere, or if there's some fidgeting, we can actually notice these might be some impulses or survival responses that are here. Maybe we notice that our legs kind of want to leave the room, or we notice there's a kind of fight energy in our upper body. Or maybe we can feel a collapsing of our spine, which might be a sign that the body is kind of feeling a little frozen. So if it's possible to make space for that, no problem. If you'd rather not, that's also okay. And then the feelings. Let's see if we can just notice an emotion. And I might invite us just to first notice something that you feel grateful for right now, whether it's a person, an experience, time. And notice what gratitude offers us on a felt sense. And then also noticing, are there any other emotions here that might be worth getting curious about? Maybe is there a little anxiety or a lot anxiety, or a little irritation or a lot irritation? And a little sense of hopelessness or some grief. And we're just going to make space for all of that. And then we're going to just notice what's on our mind right now. And especially see if we can notice any thoughts that support us in being here. You can even notice the quality of your mind. So is it really clear and calm, which might suggest the social engagement system's on? Or is the mind scattered, which might be a sign that it's kind of more in a flight energy? Or is the mind feeling kind of numb or cloudy? And it's hard to feel much of anything or think much of anything. It's drowsy. That might be a sign that we're, in this moment, being visited by a bit of a freeze energy. Again, having space for whatever's here, not needing to fix it, but just to make space for it. And then finally, the P is just to proceed into this moment. Maybe we've learned a little bit more about what our system is experiencing right now. Maybe we've learned a little bit more about what supports us right now. And maybe acknowledging ourselves for having done the exercise. And trusting that it's contributing to our wellness, and it's something we can do whenever we need to. Okay, so we are going to remember some of these attitudes that we talked about earlier. Being kind to self and other, staying attentive to self and other, going slow and being patient, being curious and not judging or shaming, and just trusting that we're creating a container together that makes this workable, because we're going to do a little exercise, which I think is really important. And that is to have a moment where we can actually, in a small group, just share a little bit with one or two other people. So in a moment, we're going to kind of break into groups, ideally of 3, and ideally in your same row or in your close vicinity if there's nobody sitting beside you. And if it ends up that there's a couple of groups of two, that's also fine. And this is going to be pretty scripted because I've got a bell. This is the sound is going to be. And in your group, once everybody's in a group, we're going to you take turns. And each person will have 90 seconds. And what will you do in those 90 seconds? The invitation is to share what did you notice about your current state of your body, what emotions are happening, and of your mind. And feel free to share any taking in the good that you experienced. And it's really common for us to fall into our story of our past. That can be a thought that showed up now. Great, share it. But see if you can add more to that than just our cognitive intelligence. There's so much more else that we can attend to that's really important for healing. And then there are a few people here support-wise that will just support us to make sure you're in a group if you want to be. So a group of 3, a group of 2 is fine. And if somebody really does not want to do the exercise, if that just actually feels unsafe right now, not a problem. You're welcome to actually reflect on your own. That would be welcome. If you at all feel curious and comfortable, I strongly encourage you to practice this because that's part of our healing is to step a little bit out of our comfort zone, but not too much if it's more than you want to handle right now. So I wonder if we could do this. It could literally take 30 to 40 seconds to set up, and then I'll start the bell. Okay, so I'm going to ring the bell, and hopefully you've already chosen who's going to go first. That person's going to have 90 seconds, and I'll give you a heads up when there's about 10 seconds left. And the other 2 people, 1 or 2 people, are going to zip it. Which means if the person's silent who's speaking, we don't fill the space. We actually stay patient, and we see what else emerges. Does that make sense? Okay. I am starting the timer. First person, please go ahead and begin. Okay, so thank you everyone for starting the process. Before we go to person number 2, it's actually really helpful just to take a moment to notice what that's like for you. If you were a speaker or a listener, just notice the impact of either sharing our experience or listening to another. And see what that was like for you, whether there was some activation or a sense of connection. All of that's fine. And now, if you're ready, we'll go to person number 2 in your group. So go ahead and start when you're ready. I'm so glad I brought this bell. Okay, so once again, let's take a pause and notice the impact. It's probably going to be a little different. And then if you are in a group of 3, in a moment, we'll transition to the third person. If you're in a group of 2, feel free to just have a back and forth between the 2 of you now for the next minute and a half. And if you're somebody who's choosing to kind of self-reflect, again, just keep doing whatever seems to be working for you. All right, go ahead and begin round 3. Okay, thank you. That's a good sign that the energy, I'm going to take that as a sign that as we start to talk about our experiences, and it's amazing, even with silence, that we can feel heard. That actually supports us in fully being here. So let's just take one more moment to notice the impact and how we are in our bodies and in our minds and hearts. And I'm going to invite us also, as just another practice that we can consider, is to maybe just really feel our feet on the ground and let ourselves sense the connection with the earth below us. It's so easy to feel alone and isolated that we even forget that this earth below us constantly, through the force of gravity, cares about us, and that we are a part of this earth. So kind of just letting ourselves feel through our feet that support and actually our mutual care that needs to happen. So we're getting close to the final pieces here, and going to say a little bit about setting some intentions and some takeaways, and then I'm going to invite Joanna up in a moment. So I wonder if we might just take a few moments together to set an intention from today. We covered a lot of different things, and rather than feeling overwhelmed and feeling like you have to do a bunch of things, I invite you just to choose one thing. So I'll share some possibilities. It might be that you want to connect with what brings you a sense of ease and a felt sense of safety. And we've explored a few different ideas today around that. It might be that today you're actually really interested about showing some compassion and appreciation for some of our survival responses. So if we're used to judging our freeze response, what would it be like to actually remember, hey, that kept me alive. It's got me to this point. For me, it's around my fawn energy. It's like I hate the part of me that, suppresses myself and actually worries about how other people are doing. But actually, on another side, that part has really helped me get to this point. And maybe I have other tools now. So that's an important piece. Maybe today you've actually been able to get into your body in a way that you haven't before. And there's the space to be a bit curious about sensing what's happening in our bodies and tracking, both to notice support and to notice where there's activation in the types. Maybe you really had some value in just breathing and letting that support some activation in our system, or moving at times to really let that happen, whether that's through, spontaneous movement or even through some organized movement. And then find safe spaces. So this is maybe an intention to, maybe you had a connection today that you normally don't give yourself permission for, and that it was actually less terrible than you thought. And so maybe it's like, oh, wow, are there some people who I do actually trust enough to start trying that with? Or maybe you already have those people and it's really a question of just being more intentional around it. And then perhaps you've noticed, wow, actually I do have more capacity than I thought, and I can offer a safe space to another. Maybe I can bring some of these qualities that we've been talking about to another person who I sense is in need. So feel free to just kind of think about your intention, what that might be. You're also welcome to write your intention down on the pamphlet you were given at the beginning, because we're interested too. If you had some intentions, that's actually helpful for us to know what matters to you. So key learning points from today: attending to our whole selves and accessing a felt sense of safety are key to healing. Whole selves really means not just our mind, but also our intuition, our bodies, accessing our relationship with the world around us. Understanding the energies of our survival responses lessens shame and judgment. I know that's been very true for myself and many of the people that I've supported, that really this conversation can help us bring more compassion to ourselves and to others. And really, we don't have to solve everything today. This is not like a fire hose where we're just trying to fix everything in one moment. This is more about just working within what we can tolerate. So there's a gentleness to this. And we just need to work with this moment and trust that over time, our system can unravel from things that maybe have been locked from the past, again, without having enough safety or support. And finally, healing happens in caring, compassionate relationships. And I think I've said plenty about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about resources. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there are handouts at the front. And these resources actually will also be on the website. So don't worry about writing all this down if you don't want to, because it's all available for you. So these are resources, especially if you're experiencing crises. And we didn't necessarily vet everything 100%. So we've done our best to make sure everything is a live link and a correct number. But please forgive us if we've made some oversights. Then there's a lot of resources for our Sechelt Nation relatives and other Indigenous community members, Métis members. These are a variety of phone numbers that you can access. Again, I ask for your forgiveness if we don't quite have everything exactly right. The very bottom one, I just spoke with Noelle Hanous yesterday, and she wanted me to remind folks that she does offer counseling on Thursdays for Sechelt Nation members. And alongside that, Sito had mentioned that the ground penetrating radar work is being done right now. And Bev Dixon, Sechelt Nation member, has very kindly offered to be doing some brushing for the workers to help them clear some of that work from their systems. And Bev is willing, if somebody from today is noticing this conversation has brought up some things for you, that you want some support. She, I believe, will be at the Memorial Monument. The Residential Schools Memorial Monument behind Ravens Cry right after this event. So please just consider, I think it's maybe 1 or 2 people. So not necessarily accessing that resource unless you really notice your system needs it, to make sure the people who do need it have access. These are a bunch of books that I've personally found helpful. So feel free to check some of them out and see if they have some appeal to you as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and Marilyn had alluded to this before, we do run some group medical visits here on the Sunshine Coast. Myself and Dr. Suzanne Walter offer group medical visits, either in cognitive behavioral therapy, and that does have a kind of slant towards body work as well. And I offer some trauma-sensitive mindfulness group medical visits. Those do require a referral from a primary care provider. And as I mentioned, Suzanne and I are the facilitators. And before COVID, we were doing some of them in person. For the most part, it's been online, although we are starting in person, hopefully in the fall. Well, actually, more than hopefully. I think it's happening. For the CBT groups, myself and Suzanne are going to begin the process of co-facilitating some of those groups. And so that's a place where you get a chance to practice in community. And hopefully you got a sense from today that there's a lot of power when we do things together. There's a whole lot of other resources that are in our community, including a brochure from the mental health care team that's at the front. So if you're looking for other resources, please do check that out. And perhaps hopefully you get from today that our number one resource is actually our own ability to be with our bodies in new relationship, and our ability to be with our loved ones with a caring heart. And in those places, along with our relationship with the land, in many ways we have everything we need to be well. And may that journey continue. The very last thing I'm going to mention is, it happens to be tonight, there's the Walk With Your Doc event happening out of Mission Point Park at 6:30 tonight. So if actually part of what you want to do is move through whatever's been stored in your system today, please feel free to join us. I'm going to be there. I know a bunch of other providers are going to be there as well. And it's really more about us walking together. And so I think it's going to be starting at 6:30 sharp, and it'll just maybe about a 20 to 30 minute walk. Okay.
Okay, so I have questions for you. We have a variety of questions. I don't know, Ralph, you want to sit with Marilyn maybe,
Yes,
or whatever, because Marilyn might want to pitch in. So, question: is there a role to block memories? Is it better sometimes that some things are just left alone?
Great question. And so, again, this is coming to, in my mind, the genius of our survival responses, because that is what the freeze physiology is telling us to do. It's actually purposefully keeping us from memories that right now are too overwhelming for us to really process. So when we're in that physiology, our system is literally keeping fragmented parts of our history from essentially knowing each other. And that's on purpose, so that we're kept from things that are too overwhelming. And as we heal, there'll come a time when suddenly we might notice we're getting visited by things that before were outside of our awareness. That's not a bad sign. That's actually a sign that part of us feels there's enough safety for some of these things to come on board. I have a feeling you have something to say about this.
It's true. It's very true that so many things you just kind of block and don't want to know, don't even look at. They've got nothing to do with who you are. And then as you do, you learn how to deal with, as things come up, more things that you need to know, I guess, will come up. And the rest, if you don't need to know, I guess. So it's just, whatever. I'm just finding that what I need to do to heal comes to me, and what doesn't stays wherever it's supposed to stay. And that's fine.
Beautiful. Thank you.
What is the top thing that employers could do to provide a safe healing space for those with living experience?
Is that a question for Marilyn?
That's a question for both of you.
Okay.
What can employers do?
Wow, that's right. That first of all, you'd have to have the trust to be able to let your employer know that you are in that place. A lot of people are hiding trauma, hiding wounds, hiding so many things because of the shame, the guilt. They don't want to be judged, so they would never bring that up. Whereas if you have a compassionate employer who would allow and you would feel safe to do that, I think that would be just wonderful right there, having a safe space that you can, that people are aware of your traumas, not necessarily having to do anything, just awareness and compassion for you.
Beautiful answer. And I would add what's coming to my mind as I hear you. The number one thing employers could do is actually understand trauma and do their own work. Because what I'm suggesting here is all of us are holding some of this in our system. And the more we access that in ourselves, actually, the more we understand and have compassion for others and understand that this is not a personal process. This is a system issue. And I would imagine as employers, the more we actually understand it and feel it from the inside as well as intellectually, will help create the conditions for those that work in our organization.
Thank you. Question: if a childhood trauma is dealt with immediately, is it less likely to become PTSD?
Absolutely. That's the thing. Is there enough safety and is there enough support to manage and meet the moment? It doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of challenge around something, but the more safety, the more support that's available so that the young being knows this was not my problem. This was not mine and I have to internalize it. This is actually a system issue and it was something that was done to me rather than something I deserved. That is critical to healing. And I don't know if you want to add to that.
Totally. I agree. Yeah, that feeling that savior, or just that somebody cares. Somebody's there for you. Somebody you can trust. The trust is huge. And that, I think, because when you're young and going through all of that, the whole world's scary. There's nobody you can trust. You're all alone. So just being able to have somebody who can reach out and help, I think that would make a huge difference in changing the attitudes for later.
And that could be a parent, but it could also be a teacher. It could be any mentor. I think we want to expand our sense of how we might show up for each other and our young ones.
So if someone is ready to tell their story, what is the consideration about the person they're going to tell it to? Like, is there therapeutic value in telling your story to someone who isn't trained to deal with it?
I mean, to me, I would say beyond training, there are human qualities of caring, of listening, of being available, and all the things that we talked about. So if you meet a person who's kind, who's attentive, who's patient with you, who's curious about your experience, and who trusts you and doesn't judge you, that's the person. And they don't need to have any training beyond that. And we all know people like that. Mm-hmm. And so we need to really honor that versus necessary. I would add, if we really want to work with it, is somebody who's comfortable working on the level of the body. And again, all of us potentially could be that person.
What is a behavior you would emphasize for clinicians to use in practice to help create more safety?
I mean, we run 12-hour workshops on that. So, I mean, what I would say the number one thing is what we're talking about here is, can I really think about the very first few things, really offering people choice, offering people permission around anything, and being able to notice if somebody's nervous system is saying no. Mm-hmm. So if a person's going through an exam in a medical situation, if there's any inkling that the person's starting to check out or isn't fully here, rather than proceeding, this is a really critical time for us to pause, create some space, help the person come online so that we avoid re-traumatizing somebody simply because we misinterpreted their silence.
Okay, so this is a tough one. How do I have community when my community has abandoned me? How do I feel safety when I have never really known what safety feels like?
Yeah, and I'm sorry that some of us are having that experience. To me, what I would say, and I'd be curious, Marilyn, your thoughts, but this is to me where we can explore the non-human world. There are so many other species out there that have nothing but love in their hearts. And there's the land that is so forgiving and so available as long as we care for her, that is basically waiting for us to connect. And so getting out onto nature walks, spending time in the ocean, feeling the rhythms of the natural world around us and in us, I think those can be our community. Those can be the places where we feel a sense of belonging.
I agree, and totally. And like the thing about not trusting anybody is if you have to learn to trust yourself first, and then when you can have that sense of trust in yourself, then because I always felt I was going to make the wrong decision. I couldn't trust any decision, including the people that I brought into my life. So now that I'm learning how to trust myself and my decisions, then I'm knowing that the people that I'm bringing into my life are going to be the kind of people that are going to lift me up and not abandon me or not walk away from me. So it's about getting that sense of self and getting that sense of through being with my dog or being out in the forest and walking around and getting those senses that I'm okay. My being is okay, and then stretch that out as slowly and as comfortably as you can.
Actually, if I could add one more thing that's coming up for me is one of the big challenges when we're feeling very traumatized is we are going to misinterpret ambiguous cues as being more threatening than they are. We're going to misinterpret ambiguous cues as being more threatening than they are. So this is kind of corroborating what you're saying is, to a certain degree, we have to find, whether it's through access to being with land or other safe spaces, we need to work on that sense of a little bit more safety within us. So we're actually going to be more likely to interpret other people's activities, especially if they're kind of neutral, as just neutral rather than a sign of threat. Yeah. And we might then start to expand what community members around us, we might start to realize actually there are a few people where we do feel a little bit more trust, where we are being met. And that can be a kind of a starting place, as you said, that can keep building.
And if it doesn't feel good, you walk away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dr. Gupta, how did your parents' experience with partition get passed down to you or manifest in you?
Yeah, great question. So, it would be a lot of different ways, but I'd say most of it was wordless. A lot of it was, I think maybe more around, if I think about colonial India, my parents learned how to please and appease. So they learned how to keep themselves safe by not saying anything that would be threatening for themselves in that environment. Hey, guess what? I'm living in an environment where my caregivers, day after day, are pleasing with everybody in their community. Well, that wasn't something that, I went through, but I inherited it because that's how we lived our lives. I could never make sense of it because I couldn't really connect the dots. But once I actually did, and I started to realize, wow, that's not mine. It's actually not even really my parents. It was actually a system issue. I'm still recovering from that, but I would say that's perhaps the most obvious example that comes to mind.
Right. Okay. Is it possible to heal from trauma without naming it or looking it in the face?
That's interesting. I mean, I don't think we have to use the word. No reason. But I do think we need to experience discomfort. We need to have enough capacity and support around us that we can tolerate feeling some things that at the time were not, we didn't have enough support, and it was too overwhelming or too quick to feel. And that's uncomfortable. So we have to create the conditions where we can go to the hard places. That's, in my mind, an absolute necessity. And that's why community is so important, because maybe we don't know what to do. But hey, guess what? I'm in a group of 5 people. That person just said something that resonates with me. Or that person who I thought was never going to heal has just tried something. And that can inspire us and try different things. And we get to learn from each other and have different experiences.
Okay, great. You'll probably know who this is. I was part of your first 8-week mindfulness course. How has your life changed since because you stepped into this realm?
Victory.
How much time we got?
Minute.
Oh, a minute.
Okay.
1 minute.
Well, how about whoever asked that question, find me afterwards. We can talk about it more if you like. But I'll just say briefly, my life's changed completely. I used to be, I can tell you, much more of a hermit. I hated being in front of people. I still don't particularly like it, but I do it because it's something I'm passionate about. And but I would say month by month, year by year, I am healing, and I feel far more comfortable being with people. I feel far more comfortable sharing my needs and wants, and therefore not having to avoid people because I feel at risk of just deferring to other people's needs and wants. So I feel a deep gratitude for all those that I've been in groups with here on the coast, because honestly, I've learned as much from you as hopefully we've learned together.
That's the physician heal yourself bit, right?
Yeah,
Excellent.
definitely.
Excellent. Thank you.